2 Chronicles 6, 1 through 42. Devotional focus verse. Then what prayer or what supplication soever shall be made of any man, or of all thy people Israel, when every one shall know his own sore and his own grief, and shall spread forth his hands in this house, then hear thou from heaven thy dwelling place, and forgive and render unto every man according unto all his ways, whose heart thou knowest, for thou only knowest the hearts of the children of men. 2 Chronicles 6, 29 and 30. When I was growing up, we always had chickens on our farm. One year, Mom and Dad bought huge incubators and filled the small living area of our house with them. The lamps of those incubators warmed the eggs and us as well, night and day, as the eggs developed into hatching chicks. The incubators had double shelves holding trays with rows of eggs, which had to be turned every day. The part that fascinated us children was the candling. That was when each egg was held up to a light so we could look into it and determine if a chick was developing inside. If it was, we could actually see the embryo growing in the egg. If there was no life evident in the egg, it was discarded. Anyone can see through an eggshell if they hold it up to a bright light, but there is only one who can see into the hearts of men, and that is God. Today's focus verse says, "Thou only knowest the hearts of the children of men." When a sinner is longing for salvation, though you and I might not think that one would ever surrender, God can see through the facade and pretense. He sees past the false bravado of a soul that is crying inside for Him, and can melt the hardness of that heart. Then when that person surrenders, God gives a new heart, removing all the confusion, guilt, and turmoil, and replacing it with peace, joy, and confidence in Him. How thankful we are that while we were still sinners, He looked past our sinful actions to our longing for deliverance. Even after we are saved, it is important for us to allow God to keep searching our hearts. He watches to make sure we are developing properly and nurtures us each day. He knows when we hurt, when we are lonely, when we are discouraged, and when we are faithful. No matter what challenges we face, God knows how to help us through because He sees what we need, even when we do not. It is a comfort to know that God can see past what others see, to the innermost thoughts and intents of our heart. As we walk with Him, let's remember to ask Him to look into our hearts, that we might grow to be more like Him each day. Background information. Chapter 6 continues the description of the dedication of Solomon's temple that began in chapter 5. This chapter describes Solomon's blessing upon the people who had assembled for the event. See verses 1 through 11, and then records his prayer of dedication and request for God's blessing upon Israel. See verses 12 through 42. Solomon's address to the congregation that stood before him centered on gratitude to God for fulfilling His promises to David. His comment in verse 4 about God, who hath with His hands fulfilled that which He spake with His mouth, was recognition that the temple was the fulfillment of God's plan rather than David's or his own. David and Solomon were human instruments, but the design was God's. In verse 5, Solomon referenced Israel's history by mentioning the exodus out of Egypt. Though that event had occurred some 500 years earlier, it was important that it remain as real in Israel's national awareness as it was on the day it happened. In verses 10 and 11, Solomon presented the newly finished temple to the Lord. Solomon's prayer of dedication, see verses 12 through 42, took place on a high brazen scaffold that would have enabled the entire assembly to easily see him. His posture of kneeling before the Lord in view of the whole assembly, noted in verse 13, was unusual for a king because it denoted submission to a higher authority. Both by words and actions, Solomon demonstrated his respect for and acknowledgement of God as the ultimate authority. Solomon began his prayer by expressing gratitude to God for his past fulfillment of promises, and then asked the Lord to fulfill the promises he had made to his father David. In verses 22 through 39, Solomon made 7 specific petitions to God, and each was directly associated with worship at the temple. His petitions were that God would confirm the innocence of the just and condemn the guilty. See verses 22 and 23. That God would forgive and restore the nation. See verses 24 and 25. That God would forgive and send rain when Israel's sins would bring drought. See verses 26 and 27. That God would forgive and heal the land of famine, pestilence, and other afflictions. See verses 28 through 31. That God would hear the prayer of foreigners who would seek him. See verses 32 through 33. That God would grant his people victory in any God-directed battles. See verses 34 through 35. That God would hear and forgive those who would pray for their sins while in captivity. See verses 36 through 39. Solomon concluded his prayer in much the same way as he began, with an expression of his desire for God to fulfill the promises he had made to David. Conclusion: God is looking at hearts today. What does he see when he looks at yours and mine? By his grace, we want to be developing just as he desires.
2 Chronicles Chapter 6. Then said Solomon, The Lord hath said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. But I have built an house of habitation for thee, and a place for thy dwelling forever. And the king turned his face, and blessed the whole congregation of Israel, and all the congregation of Israel stood. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who hath with his hands fulfilled that which he spake with his mouth to my father David, saying, Since the day that I brought forth my people out of the land of Egypt, I chose no city among all the tribes of Israel to build an house in, that my name might be there, neither chose I any man to be a ruler over my people Israel. But I have chosen Jerusalem, that my name might be there, and have chosen David to be over my people Israel. Now it was in the heart of David my father to build an house for the name of the Lord God of Israel. But the Lord said to David my father, Forasmuch as it was in thine heart to build an house for my name, thou didst well in that it was in thine heart. Notwithstanding thou shalt not build the house, but thy son which shall come forth out of thy loins, he shall build the house for my name. The Lord therefore hath performed his word that he hath spoken, for I am risen up in the room of David my father, and am set on the throne of Israel, as the Lord promised, and have built the house for the name of the Lord God of Israel. And in it have I put the ark, wherein is the covenant of the Lord, that he made with the children of Israel. And he stood before the altar of the Lord in the presence of all the congregation of Israel, and spread forth his hands. For Solomon had made a brassen scaffold of 5 cubits long, and 5 cubits broad, and 3 cubits high, and had set it in the midst of the court, and upon it he stood, and kneeled down upon his knees before all the congregation of Israel, and spread forth his hands toward heaven. And said, O Lord God of Israel, there is no God like thee in the heaven, nor in the earth, which keepest covenant, and showest mercy unto thy servants, that walk before thee with all their hearts. Thou which hast kept with thy servant David my father that which thou hast promised him, and spakest with thy mouth, and hast fulfilled it with thine hand, as it is this day. Now therefore, O Lord God of Israel, keep with thy servant David my father that which thou hast promised him, saying, There shall not fail thee a man in my sight to sit upon the throne of Israel, yet so that thy children take heed to their way to walk in my law, as thou hast walked before me. Now then, O Lord God of Israel, let thy word be verified, which thou hast spoken unto thy servant David. But will God in very deed dwell with men on the earth? Behold, heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain thee, how much less this house which I have built. Have respect therefore to the prayer of thy servant, and to his supplication, O Lord my God, to hearken unto the cry and the prayer which thy servant prayeth before thee. That thine eyes may be open upon this house day and night, upon the place whereof thou hast said that thou wouldest put thy name there, to hearken unto the prayer which thy servant prayeth toward this place. Hearken therefore unto the supplications of thy servant, and of thy people Israel, which they shall make toward this place. Hear thou from thy dwelling place, even from heaven, and when thou hearest, forgive. If a man sin against his neighbor, and an oath be laid upon him to make him swear, and the oath come before thine altar in this house, then hear thou from heaven, and do, and judge thy servants, by requiting the wicked, by recompensing his way upon his own head, and by justifying the righteous, by giving him according to his righteousness. And if thy people Israel be put to the worse before the enemy, because they have sinned against thee, and shall return and confess thy name, and pray and make supplication before thee in this house, then hear thou from the heavens, and forgive the sin of thy people Israel, and bring them again unto the land which thou gavest to them and to their fathers. When the heaven is shut up, and there is no rain, because they have sinned against thee, yet if they pray toward this place, and confess thy name, and turn from their sin, when thou dost afflict them, then hear thou from heaven, and forgive the sin of thy servants, and of thy people Israel, when thou hast taught them the good way, wherein they should walk, and send rain upon thy land, which thou hast given unto thy people for an inheritance. If there be dearth in the land, if there be pestilence, if there be blasting, or mildew, locusts, or caterpillars, if their enemies besiege them in the cities of their land, whatsoever sore or whatsoever sickness there be, then what prayer or what supplication soever shall be made of any man, or of all thy people Israel, when every one shall know his own sore and his own grief, and shall spread forth his hands in this house, then hear thou from heaven thy dwelling place, and forgive, and render unto every man according unto all his ways, whose heart thou knowest, for thou only knowest the hearts of the children of men. That they may fear thee, to walk in thy ways, so long as they live in the land which thou gavest unto our fathers. Moreover concerning the stranger, which is not of thy people Israel, but is come from a far country for thy great name's sake, and thy mighty hand, and thy stretched out arm, if they come and pray in this house, then hear thou from the heavens, even from thy dwelling place, and do according to all that the stranger calleth to thee for, that all people of the earth may know thy name, and fear thee, as doth thy people Israel, and may know that this house which I have built is called by thy name. If thy people go out to war against their enemies by the way that thou shalt send them, and they pray unto thee toward this city which thou hast chosen, and the house which I have built for thy name, then hear thou from the heavens their prayer and their supplication, and maintain their cause. If they sin against thee, for there is no man which sinneth not, and thou be angry with them, and deliver them over before their enemies, and they carry them away captives unto a land far off or near. Yet if they bethink themselves in the land whither they are carried captive, and turn and pray unto thee in the land of their captivity, saying, We have sinned, we have done amiss, and have dealt wickedly. If they return to thee with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their captivity, whither they have carried them captives, and pray toward their land, which thou gavest unto their fathers, and toward the city which thou hast chosen, and toward the house which I have built for thy name, then hear thou from the heavens, even from thy dwelling place, their prayer and their supplications, and maintain their cause, and forgive thy people which have sinned against thee. Now, my God, let, I beseech thee, thine eyes be open, and let thine ears be attent unto the prayer that is made in this place. Now therefore arise, O Lord God, into thy resting place, thou, and the ark of thy strength, let thy priests, O Lord God, be clothed with salvation, and let thy saints rejoice in goodness. O Lord God, turn not away the face of thine anointed, remember the mercies of David thy servant.